Okay, let's dive in. You've probably seen the headlines, heard the buzz, maybe even dabbled yourself. Generative AI is officially making its way into the workplace, integrated into the tools many of us use every single day. But how is it really changing things? Not the high-level promises, but, the actual day-to-day work patterns for thousands of people.
That's the critical question, isn't it? We get lots of anecdotal evidence and survey data, but seeing large-scale, real-world behavioral change, well, cross-diverse organizations, that's a much harder thing to pin down.
Exactly. And that's why today we're taking a deep dive into a specific, really robust study that gives us some of that early concrete evidence.
Ah, okay.
We're looking at a large-scale randomized field experiment involving over 7,000 knowledge workers using an integrated AI tool, specifically Microsoft 365 Copilot.
Right. And this wasn't just asking people if they felt AI was helping them. This study used direct, detailed product usage data to track precisely how work patterns shifted over 6 months.
Yeah, the how. Our mission here is to unpack this study, extract the absolute most important insights from it, what actually changed in people's daily work, what stubbornly stayed the same, and what that tells us about these initial waves of AI adoption in the office.
And what's fascinating here is both the scale and the methodology. They had, 7,137 knowledge workers across 66 different large firms participating.
That's a substantial sample size for this kind of real-world test.
Definitely.
And the setup was crucial. It was a randomized experiment. Half the workers got access to Copilot, built right into their familiar apps like Outlook, Teams, Word. The other half were the control group, continuing their work without the tool.
Standard setup.
And this ran for 6 months, from September 2023 to October 2024, during the early rollout phase of the tool.
Right, so early days, really. And the data source is another crucial point. They use detailed product usage telemetry, essentially, the digital footprint of how people interacted with their work applications. This captured how much time they spent in different apps, when they used them, and how they interacted with the Copilot features. Critically, it did not observe the content of their work, which is important for privacy.
Right. Good point. So the focus is purely on these behavioral shifts in work patterns.
Exactly. Patterns and time allocation.
Right. It's about the patterns and the time allocation. And they looked at the effects in two ways. There's the effect of just having access to Copilot. That's the intent to treat, or ITT, estimate. And then there's the effect for people who actually used it regularly. That's the local average treatment effect, or late estimate. Maybe explain for a moment why that distinction matters.
Sure. So the ITT gives us the picture of just giving people access in a real-world scenario, what happens on average across the whole group that could use it. Where some will use it a lot, some a little, maybe some not at all.
Okay, the real-world rollout effect.
Right. It reflects the outcome of a typical rollout. The LN estimate, however, isolates the effects specifically for the people who really integrated the tool into their workflow, defined here as using it in at least half of the study weeks.
Oh, the regular users.
Exactly. It shows us the potential impact when the tool is actively leveraged. Both give us different valuable perspectives.
Got it. So access versus actual adoption. And the usage patterns themselves tell us quite a bit about that early adoption.
They do.
Over 90% of workers who received access did try the tool at least once during the 6 months, which suggests people were curious, willing to explore.
They were definitely kicking the tires, but usage intensity varied widely across individuals and importantly across firms.
Okay.
The average treated worker used Copilot in about 41% of the study wins, but that average hides huge firm-to-firm differences.
How huge?
Well, get this. In one firm, the average worker used it in just 6.3% of weeks, while in another, it was a robust 75%.
Wow, that's a dramatic difference. So, what was the biggest factor predicting usage then? Was it individual tech savviness, job roles, maybe the industry?
Interestingly, no. The single strongest predictor of how much a worker used the tool was the firm they belonged to.
The company itself.
Yeah. Firm differences explained more variation in usage than the workers' industry or even their pre-AI work habits.
Oh.
This really points to something about the organizational environment, perhaps firm culture, the quality of training, or, internal champions and practices being a major driver of adoption early on.
That's a crucial insight right there. It's not just about the tech, it's about the context it's introduced into.
Precisely.
And where were people using it the most once they had access? Which apps?
Teams was the most common application for Copilot use, followed by Outlook and then Word.
Okay.
And here's another interesting nuance. Workers in firms with high overall Copilot usage were more likely to use it in Teams features, while those in firms with lower overall usage seemed to rely more heavily on Outlook Copilot features.
Oh, interesting. What does that suggest?
Well, it might suggest that leveraging AI in real-time collaboration tools like Teams, sort of, benefits more from broader team-wide adoption compared to using it in individual communication tools like Outlook.
That makes sense.
Okay.
So we know who was using it, how much, and where. Now for the big question, what was the impact? Where did work patterns actually change significantly according to this data?
Right. The headline finding, the clearest and largest impact they found was squarely on email.
Email, the universal time sink. Knew it had to be in there somewhere.
Absolutely.
Tell me about the savings quantified by this study.
Okay, so access to Copilot, on average across all treated workers, led to an estimated 1.3 fewer hours per week spent on email. That's the ITT estimate.
1.3 hours. Okay. Not bad for just having access.
But for those who used it regularly again, in over half the study weeks, the impact was much larger, a substantial reduction of 3.6 fewer hours per week spent on email.
3.6 hours. Let's put that in perspective. The study notes the average worker in their sample spent, 11.7 hours per week on email before the study.
That's right.
So a 3.6-hour reduction, that's a significant 31% cut in email time for those regular users.
Yeah, it really is.
Just think about what you could do with an extra 3.6 hours a week.
It's a notable efficiency gain. So what does that translate to for the worker beyond just the time? Less time spent on managing the inbox overhead, basically.
We're at the drudgery.
Yeah. The study also found that regular users seem to consolidate their email work into fewer, longer sessions, which opened up almost 4 more hours of what they termed concentration time per week.
Focus time.
Exactly. These are valuable blocks of 30 minutes or more with no Outlook activity popping up. Plus, regular users spent less time on email outside of regular work hours.
Oh, reclaiming personal time too. That's huge.
Definitely.
So it helped reclaim focus time during the day and even personal time outside of work. But here's where it gets really interesting. What didn't change about email? Did they just reply to fewer messages or ignore more? Because 3.6 hours is a lot.
That's the crucial part. The study found that regular users still replied to roughly the same number of email threads each week.
Oh, okay.
And their average time to reply didn't significantly change either.
So they weren't just dropping the ball on email.
Nope. The impact wasn't on the quantity of email interactions or the speed of individual replies, but on the total time spent performing that same quantity of work across the week.
Okay. So it's about efficiency in the process.
Exactly. It suggests AI was making the process of reading, drafting, managing emails much more efficient overall, not enabling them to simply do less email work.
Less total effort for the same outcome. That makes a lot of sense for tools that help with summarizing, drafting, managing the flow. Okay, so email seems like a big win, according to this data.
A clear win, yeah.
What about other core work areas? Where were the changes more limited or subtle? Let's talk meetings.
Right. So, despite Teams being the most used application for Copilot features overall,
which we just established.
Yeah. The study found no significant change in the total time workers spent in Teams meetings or in recurring meetings.
That feels surprising. You'd think using AI for meeting summarization or generating action items might affect meeting dynamics or, length.
You might expect that, and maybe it does in ways not captured here, but in terms of time spent in meetings, no big shift. There was a slight, though not very strong, increase in individual workers joining meetings late or leaving early.
Okay.
But this seemed to be an individual behavior and didn't fundamentally restructure meeting time for regular users at the group level.
So the AI value in meetings might be more personal, like helping you catch up if you missed something?
That could be it. Maybe better focus during the meeting, or quickly getting the gist afterward, but it didn't translate into observable changes in how meeting time was structured or spent in this early phase, at least.
Okay. And what about working with documents, like using Word?
For documents, their analysis focused specifically on workers who used Word regularly before the study, so keep that caveat in mind.
Got it. Regular Word users.
They found suggestive evidence that workers completed documents faster with Copilot, possibly 25% faster.
Suggestive, okay.
But this wasn't statistically significant across the board for all document types, where the study worker was the primary editor.
Okay, so some hints of speed, but not a definitive widespread win like we saw with email.
Right, not quite as clear-cut. However, there was a specific finding for collaborative documents.
Okay. What's the distinction there?
These were documents where the study worker was the main editor, but other colleagues also contributed to the same document. Think shared reports, proposals, that kind of thing.
Right. Team documents.
Exactly. For these types of documents, time to completion was significantly reduced for regular Copilot users.
Oh, interesting. By how much faster?
On average, over 72 hours faster to complete these collaborative documents for regular users. That's the Ed estimate again.
72 hours. That's a lot.
It is. These collaborative documents often involve more back and forth, revisions, integrating feedback. So perhaps the AI tools were particularly helpful in streamlining those specific, maybe more complex parts of the process.
That makes intuitive sense, cutting down on the churn. But did speeding up document work mean people took on more writing projects overall?
Good question. The study found no significant increase in the number of documents completed where the worker was the primary editor.
Okay.
So this finding supports the idea that workers weren't necessarily increasing their overall writing output in terms of quantity.
They weren't just churning out more docs.
Right. But they were potentially doing certain types of writing, especially the collaborative kind, more efficiently. Getting it done faster, maybe better, but not necessarily doing more of it.
So if we kind of contrast the findings, the really big wins in this study seem to be on solitary individual tasks. Managing your own email inbox time, maybe speeding up parts of solo document work.
Sounds that way.
Less impact was seen on inherently collaborative activities like meeting length or fundamentally changing how document responsibilities were handled across a team.
That appears to be a clear pattern emerging from this early data. It really highlights what individual workers can independently optimize using the tool versus what requires group coordination and, broader process changes.
Which brings us to the role of colleagues and team coordination. Did the study look at that specifically? Like, if more people on your team had Copilot, did that change things?
They did. They specifically looked at whether having more close coworkers with Copilot access made a difference. The effects amplify if a few more teammates had the tool, especially for those collaborative tasks we just talked about.
Yeah, exactly. What did they find?
Well, the finding was that the effects on work patterns did not significantly differ for workers who had more colleagues with Copilot access compared to those with fewer.
Huh. That's quite interesting. And maybe a little unexpected. I might have guessed it would make a difference.
It is interesting. The study's interpretation is that this finding suggests individual access to the tool, even within a team where some others also have it, isn't sufficient on its own to fundamentally change behaviors that require tight coordination across the group.
Right, like changing how meetings run or who does what on a shared doc.
Exactly. Changes like restructuring meetings, rethinking shared document workflows, or reallocating responsibilities.
Yeah.
These likely need broader, firm-level strategy, intentional process transformation, and potentially much higher saturation of the tool within teams than what they observed here.
It sounds like it takes more than just sprinkling the tech around to reshape those established team workflows and collaborative habits.
That seems to be the implication.
Especially considering that even in the teams the study called high saturation, the average peer access was only about 37%. So it's still largely individual tool adoption happening within a group context, not really a fully enabled team.
Exactly. You likely need more than just a few individuals getting access to shift those deeply embedded team-level ways of working.
Okay, let's try to pull all these pieces together then. What's the overarching takeaway from this extensive early study on generative AI in the workplace, if you had to sum it up?
I'd say the key takeaway from this early phase of generative AI adoption based on this study's data is pretty clear. The most significant, measurable impact was on individual workers gaining valuable time savings, particularly in managing that pervasive communication overhead like email.
Right. So individual workers, given the tool, figured out how to use it to optimize tasks they had direct control over and could change on their own, managing their inbox, maybe drafting their documents faster.
Precisely. They independently explored and leveraged the tool for personal efficiency gains where they could. The missing piece, according to the study's findings in these first 6 months, is evidence of broader organizational shifts or fundamental changes in how people work together on coordinated tasks.
Like meetings or shared work?
Yeah, like meetings or collaborative document creation, driven solely by that individual tool access. That part didn't really materialize strongly in the data yet.
So if you're listening and using AI tools at work right now, you might be experiencing something similar. You might be noticing personal efficiencies, maybe saving time on managing emails or getting drafts done faster.
Feeling that individual boost.
But you might not yet be seeing fundamental changes in how your team collaborates or how your entire company operates. And this study suggests that's a really common experience in these initial days of large-scale AI adoption. It's not just you.
It really underscores that technology adoption at scale often follows phases, right? There's this initial individual exploration and efficiency gains phase, potentially followed later by more strategic, coordinated organizational transformation if and when firms decide to really lean into it.
It certainly makes you think. This study clearly demonstrates that individual workers can save hours each week just by independently adopting AI for tasks they manage alone, like email. That's tangible value.
Yes, showing tangible bottom-up value creation. It's definitely there.
So here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to ponder. If individual workers can achieve these kinds of time savings just by independently adopting AI for personal tasks, what could happen when companies do implement organization-wide strategies?
The next phase.
What happens when they intentionally leverage AI across entire teams and workflows to really rethink processes? What kinds of larger transformations might we see next, and how will that really reshape jobs and the very nature of work in the years to come?